2010 through 2014 Ford SVT Raptor rear brake pads and rotor replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the rear brake pads and rotors. So we're going to be replacing it with factory replacement parts. These are the part numbers. I will link them up in the description of the video. That way if you need the part numbers you can find those there, or if you want to buy the parts you can click on the links. So in a little bit we're going to be pressing the calipers in, and if the brake fluid is over full or been topped off, you may need to suck a few ounces out here. That way when we press this fluid in, it doesn't overflow into the engine bay. If yours is low like this one here, you should be fine. So now you need to get the rear wheels off the ground. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and go ahead and remove the rear wheels. Once you get the wheels removed, we're going to take a 13mm socket and we're going to remove the caliper bracket bolts here. So as you can see, I'm using power tools and they came out pretty easy. But if you're doing it by hand, you may have to use a wrench to back it up here. It's a 17mm right here. When you try to loosen it up, it may spin on you. So go ahead and remove the two bolts from the caliper. Now you can take the caliper and pull it off. And what I like to do is inspect the caliper and make sure the boot is not torn, or ripped, or leaking in any way. So now I'll take the caliper and just rest it up here on the leaf springs here. And then I'm going to take the bracket off by removing the 18mm bolt here and here. I'm going to use my Milwaukee mid-torque. This is a 3/8 drive version, and it fits in here and it has plenty of power to remove fasteners like this. You can do this all by hand. You don't need power tools, but it makes life easier. Now you can slide the bracket off and set it aside. As you can see, mine went metal to metal here and chewed up the rotor pretty good. So that's the reason why we're replacing all this. So now we need to remove this rotor, and one of the easiest ways to do this is to take a fairly large hammer and lightly tap it on the back of the rotor like this to jar it free. And if it's stuck on there, or if the park brake is extremely tight, you may have to back the adjustment off. You can feel it how loose the rotor is when you try to pull it off. If you need to back it off, you just go on the backing plate here, and there'll be a rubber plug, and you're going to pop this rubber plug off like this. It's on the very bottom of the axle. And you'll need an angle brake spoon like this one to get in here, and you can adjust the star wheel one way to loosen it or the opposite way to tighten it, and you kind of have to do it by feel. And then once you get it backed off a few threads, you can pull the rotor off. Now with the rotor removed, we're going to inspect the park brake shoes and make sure they're in good shape and there's no damage done to them. We're also going to make sure that there's no axle seals leaking. You can use a little brake clean and clean this all up. If any of that's leaking or in bad shape, you'll need to change it out. So I'm here in Southern California and the hub is in pretty good shape, but yours may be rusty, and if it is, I recommend that you use a wire brush or a roll-lock wheel and clean that hub up. That way your new rotor will fit nice and flush on the hub here. So on the new factory rotor, it comes with a special coating sprayed onto the rotor here. This helps the brake pads wear in. If yours is an aftermarket rotor, it may come with oil on it. You may have to wash it off, but you do not want to wash this coating off here. You want to just put it on. So you want to slip it on. You want to check your park brake adjustment. So if your park brakes are loose, you need to go back on the backing plate here and adjust the star wheel with the 45-degree angle adjusting spoon here. So you'll adjust it until the park brakes just lightly touch the inside of the rotor here, and you can feel it by rotating the rotor back and forth right here. I like to adjust them up until they're snug where you can barely move the rotor, and then back it off a few notches. Once you're satisfied with the adjustment, you can go ahead and put the plug back on. Now we're going to prep the bracket here. So what we're going to do is remove the old pads, and we're going to take off all the hardware and clean everything up. So the new brake pads come with all new hardware. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this old hardware off by pulling it off with our fingers or a little screwdriver. If your bracket has a lot of rust and debris on it, you can take a wire brush and brush off any of the rust or debris that may be caked up on here and get this nice and cleaned up. After that, you can take the new hardware and press it back on. I recommend you do these one at a time, the top one, and then pop it off and then do the bottom one. I've done these a million times, so I know exactly which way they go and everything, but if you're not sure which way they go, you do them one at a time. After you get those changed out, then you can go ahead and take the slide pins here, and you're going to pull the boots back. Now you can pull these slide pins out like this, and you want to keep track of the top and bottom ones. They're slightly different. One of them has a rubber grommet on it. So once you get the pins pulled off, you can go ahead and wipe off all the old grease and also the grease that's inside the caliper here. What you can do is take a a rag and then a Phillips screwdriver and push the rag into the bore here and kind of twist it back and forth, and that'll remove the grease and build up. You can also use brake cleaner to spray in the holes and help clean out the grease. So now we're going to re-lube them up. I use Seal Glide. This is a silicone-based lubricant designed to work especially with brake parts, and it's designed to work with higher temperatures where it doesn't liquefy and run off. So we're going to put a thin layer on the pins here and then work the grease into the guides here. You may want to pop it on and off a few times and do it until everything's free and slides back and forth nice and easy. So like I was saying, the pins are slightly different. One has this little rubber bushing on it. You want to make sure that you don't mix those up. So go ahead and lube that one up and put that together. So once you got the new hardware installed and the pins lubed up, we're going to take some blue thread locker and put it on the threads of the bolts. And this prevents these bolts from vibrating loose and coming back off. So we're going to take the bracket and slip it over the rotor here. And we're going to start the two big larger bolts, the 18 millimeters, and run them in until they're snug. If you're using impact tools, don't hammer down on the bolts. We're just going to run them in until they're snug. And then we're going to take a torque wrench here and set it to 187 foot-pounds. And we're going to torque these two bolts down to 187. So once you got the rotor installed and the bracket installed and torqued down to 187 foot-pounds, we're going to prep the caliper. So now we need to press the piston back into the bore of the caliper. And to do that, what I do is I take an old brake pad and I set it on here. And I like to use a C-clamp, or you can use a brake compressing tool, and press the piston back into the bore until it's flush like this. Now we're going to install our brake pads onto the bracket here. So you're just going to lightly flare these little tabs back like this. So you can use the pad to push it back, or you can use your finger to pull it back a little bit. And so you're going to slide it onto the bracket like this until it's flush against the rotor. And you're going to do the same thing for the inner one. Now we're going to take some Seal Glide and put a little bit of this grease on the backing of the pad here. And this reduces friction and reduces vibration, which would reduce squeaking. So you're going to do that for both the outer and the inner pad. You want to be careful not to get any of the grease on the rotor or the surface of the brake pad. Now we can take the caliper and slip it over the bracket here. You want to make sure when you take the caliper that the hose is not twisted up. If it's twisted up, it'll kink it and cause restrictions or cause the caliper to stick. So go ahead and slip it over the rotor and pads. You may have to push the slide pins inwards to get the caliper to sit flush on it. So I put a little bit of that thread locker on the bolts here, and I went ahead and started both of these by hand and ran them into their snug, and then I torqued them down to 27 foot-pounds. I also used to wrench the slide pins up from rotating so you can torque it down properly. Now you can install the wheel and torque the lug nuts down to 150 foot-pounds, and you'll do the same exact process for the opposite side. Now this next step is a very important step. When you go to drive your vehicle, you need to pump the brake pedal several times until the rear calipers get pumped back up. So we press that piston in without opening up the bleeder screws. And by doing it that way, we don't have to bleed the brakes because we never opened the system up. All we need to do is pump that pedal until it's firm. If you have a spongy pedal, I recommend bleeding the brakes, but you should not have a spongy pedal. After that, you want to double check your fluid level and top it off with .4 brake fluid. So now we need to take the vehicle for a test drive and break the brake pads in. The silver coating that was sprayed on the rotors, when you first hit the brakes, it sounds like it's metal to metal. We need to wear that off, and so when we give it to the customer, they don't hear that grinding noise, which is normal until that silver paint that's sprayed on the rotors wears off. So take it for a good test drive and ease the brakes on and slowly wear that stuff off. So I'll link up all the parts and tools with the chemicals that I use to perform this brake job in the description of the video. That way, if you need to pick up any of those, you can find it there. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.